Ingrid Nilsen had spent a decade in marketing. A quiet warrior in the fiercely competitive world of technology, she was never the one to shine at parties or in big meetings, but she was the one behind the scenes, making sure her company's marketing campaigns were impactful, subtle, and filled with emotional resonance. She understood that marketing was more than numbers and data. It was the art of connecting people, of creating lasting emotions and value. Every morning, Ingrid would wake up early, slip into her sharp business attire, her gaze filled with confidence, and her hand clutching her laptop, a companion that had been by her side through all the ups and downs of her career. The tech company she worked for had grown tremendously, and Ingrid had played a key role in its success, contributing to revenue growth and even reshaping the company's marketing strategy. Her work environment was highly competitive, a place where everyone had to prove themselves day after day. Each project felt like a battle, and every victory was the result of months of hard work, stress, and sacrifice. However, what Ingrid never imagined was that in the very environment she had given so much of herself to, betrayal and deceit would emerge. After an important meeting about a new market strategy, she received a call from Human Resources. "Ingrid, we regret to inform you that you are no longer a fit for your current position. This decision is effective immediately." She sat there in her office, her hand trembling as she listened to the news, unable to believe what had just happened. Years of hard work, of dedication, suddenly evaporated in an instant. The plans, the ideas she had poured her soul into, were now discarded, overlooked in a hasty, thoughtless decision. When Ingrid knocked on the CEO's door, she still held on to the hope that she could convince the company's leader of her worth. But no, all she received was a cold look and a vague explanation about the company's financial situation, that they needed to cut staff to maintain growth. Everything seemed so easy for them, as though Ingrid had never been an integral part of the company's success. She stood frozen before the CEO's door, a feeling of emptiness flooding her mind. Questions began to swirl. Where did I go wrong, and was it all just a game? What made Ingrid's situation even more painful was the silence from her boyfriend, Michael. He wasn't just her partner at work. He was the person she had shared everything with, both professionally and personally, over the years. Ingrid had believed that if she ever failed, Michael would be the one standing by her side, the one who would help her through it all. But now, when Ingrid received the firing notice, Michael not only failed to stand up for her, but he withdrew entirely, offering no comfort or encouragement. He chose to side with the company, partly because of his job, partly because of the difficult situation the company was in. The feeling of betrayal, of being abandoned when she needed him most, cut Ingrid even deeper. She returned to her apartment, where the dim yellow light in the corner of the room reflected off an empty mirror, making her feel like she no longer recognized herself. In the days that followed, Ingrid tried her best to maintain a calm exterior, but inside, she was falling apart. Her former company, her former boyfriend, her family, everyone had turned their back on her. Each passing day, Ingrid felt like she was losing her trust in everything and everyone. The calls and messages from her mother became cold and filled with criticism. "Ingrid, don't you think you're overreacting? Mara tried to help you. And the company, do you think they wanted to do this to you?" Her mother didn't understand, and Ingrid didn't know how to explain. She had invested all her trust in her family, in the people she loved, but now it all felt like indifference. She had saved Mara's company, helped so much, but when everything fell apart, no one stood by her. Her relationship with her mother, with Michael, with the company, everything seemed like broken pieces of a past Ingrid couldn't accept. When Ingrid realized that all her efforts, All her sacrifices had been in vain. A complete sense of collapse consumed her. She wondered if she could ever stand up again. If someone who had been betrayed and abandoned like her could ever find the confidence and strength to move forward. Despair enveloped her. The tears no longer came, leaving only numbness in her heart. But deep down, Ingrid knew that she couldn't live forever in this darkness. She couldn't let those who had betrayed her win. She had made a decision. If she couldn't achieve justice through words, she would do it through success. Ingrid sat in the small room, the dim light from her computer screen casting shadows on her tired face. The feeling of helplessness clung to her, but a part of Ingrid sensed that she couldn't let things continue like this. She had lost her job, lost her boyfriend, and lost her trust in the people she once called family. But all Ingrid knew was that if she stayed in the darkness, everything would just continue as a never-ending cycle of failure. She didn't want that. She didn't want to look back and see only a past full of pain. She wanted to rise again, to reclaim what she had lost. But the problem was, she didn't know where to start. The next day, Ingrid woke up as the light outside the window began to fade. She looked into the mirror, seeing a woman who was exhausted, but also full of determination. Ingrid couldn't let herself fall any further. She began to plan quietly, preparing for a battle only she could fully understand. Although she no longer had a place in her old company, she knew that she could carve a new path, a new opportunity for herself. First, she started researching the latest marketing trends, strategies she had never tried before, tactics that hadn't yet been applied in the industry where she had once thrived. Ingrid reached out to old contacts, former colleagues, people she had worked with at the company she had once been a part of. Each call, each email she sent carried no longer the fatigue or worry she had once felt. She had become accustomed to receiving silence, to facing those who had turned their backs on her. But Ingrid wasn't waiting for help. She simply wanted to know that she still existed in this world, that her value was still recognized, even if it came from strangers. One morning, Ingrid received an offer from a small startup company. They knew her from previous marketing campaigns, and they wanted her to help them grow. Ingrid felt a surge of hope rise within her. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for, but it wasn't going to be easy. At first, Ingrid felt challenged. The new company didn't have the same resources as her previous employer. They lacked experience. They lacked a team. But Ingrid didn't allow herself to give up. She began working tirelessly, dedicating time to research every trend, every detailed strategy, every morning. Ingrid woke up early to plan, and in the evening, she stayed up late to finish the tasks left undone. This small company seemed like a challenge that she needed to overcome to prove herself. However, it didn't take long before Ingrid realized that things weren't as simple as she had hoped. Despite having great marketing strategies, implementing them in a startup environment proved difficult. Her campaigns weren't immediately recognized, and her new colleagues didn't fully understand her working style. The feeling of loneliness returned. Ingrid knew that she couldn't rely on anyone but herself. She kept working, kept fighting to deliver results. The challenges didn't discourage her. Instead, they made her stronger. As each day passed, Ingrid realized something important to rebuild her career. She needed to have a clear plan, not just rely on luck, but depend on perseverance and determination. Each night she sat down, reviewing all her projects, identifying weaknesses, and improving them. Ingrid was determined to prove that she could do it, that she could restore everything she had lost without needing anyone's help. She didn't just want to prove it to her old company. She wanted to prove to herself that that failure couldn't defeat her. She wouldn't let herself sink into the silence and betrayal that had once consumed her. Each time she looked at her computer screen, Ingrid remembered the good old days when she worked at the company, when the campaigns she led brought great success. But now, Ingrid understood that if she wanted to move forward, she had to step out of the shadows, leave behind the painful memories. To do that, she had to prove that her success would never be defined by what had happened in the past. She no longer wanted to be tied to the past, and she didn't want to continue living in that brokenness. The days ahead would be tough. Ingrid didn't know what would come, but she knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. However, what mattered was that she had decided to change. She would not accept failure, and she would not let anyone dictate her future. She would create opportunities for herself, rise from the very collapse she had experienced. Ingrid had once thought that after everything she had gone through, there would be nothing left for her to hold on to. But in reality, it was these challenges that made her awaken. After deciding to fully commit herself to the small startup, Ingrid began seeking opportunities in places where no one would expect. The world outside was not always bright, but Ingrid had long been accustomed to standing alone. She started with small steps, with no promises, no guarantees. As each day passed, Ingrid realized that she alone could change her destiny. With this determination, Ingrid didn't allow herself to make mistakes, especially since the new company hadn't risen as she had hoped. A part of her still remembered the glorious days when she worked at her old company. But now Ingrid understood that those past times held nothing worth clinging to. What she needed was a new path, a new beginning, no matter how difficult it might be. A month passed, and Ingrid began to see the results of the strategies she applied at the startup. A small campaign succeeded, a solid step forward, and gradually, she began to notice a change in the work environment around her. However, just as Ingrid was preparing for a major project, an event made her reflect on everything that had passed. One morning, she received a call from a former colleague at the company where she had been fired. The person, someone Ingrid occasionally kept in touch with, called and told her that her old company was facing financial difficulties. The story seemed like just a rumor, but Ingrid knew that her old company had always faced underlying issues. She didn't know why she should pay attention to this, but a part of her wanted to learn more. What started as a coincidence soon became clear to Ingrid. These small details could lead to a big opportunity. She began researching everything that could be related to her old company's financial situation. The financial reports, unofficial information from industry insiders all pointed to one direction. Ingrid's former company was gradually heading toward collapse. Although there was no official confirmation, Ingrid could sense that something was unfolding at that moment. She realized that she could leverage her knowledge of the company to create a breakthrough. It wasn't about revenge. It was about proving that she still had value, that what she had done was not in vain. In the days that followed, Ingrid quietly monitored the situation of her old company, analyzing the information and data she had gathered. One day, Ingrid noticed an interesting detail in a financial report from her old company, a large transaction with a partner she had once helped during marketing campaigns. However, what Ingrid discovered wasn't just the cleverness of her past work, it was the lack of transparency in the company's transactions. There were payments the company had received from the partner, but these were not included in the official report. Ingrid couldn't help but feel stunned as she realized that the company she had once worked for might be deliberately hiding a significant portion of the money they had received from contracts. This wasn't just a financial issue. It was a serious threat to those who had once trusted the company. Ingrid began to devise a plan based on the information she had collected. She didn't want to make everything public, understanding that a corporate scandal could severely affect her own career. But Ingrid knew that if she didn't act, those who had betrayed and exploited her would continue to go on with their lives without any remorse. Meanwhile, her old company began to face real financial difficulties. A few major partners started to express concerns about the company's financial situation, and this caused their stability to waver. Negotiations with foreign partners became tense, and the employees within the company no longer had the confidence they once had. A month later, Ingrid decided to take action. She called a lawyer she had worked with in the past, someone who had helped her with large projects. Ingrid shared with him what she had discovered, the shady transactions of her old company and the gaps in their financial reports. The lawyer didn't say anything immediately, but Ingrid could sense that he was thinking carefully about the matter. After a few exchanges through phone and email, Ingrid received a legal report indicating that her old company might be facing a major lawsuit due to their lack of transparency in transactions. She realized that it was the silence and mistakes in their financial reports that would be her opportunity to reclaim the justice she had lost. Ingrid didn't rush to expose everything. She knew that this wasn't the right time to make noise, but she began preparing everything for an official course of action. Each day, Ingrid grew closer to bringing out the truth she had been robbed of over the following months. Her old company gradually started to feel the effects of their wrong decisions. Partners began to pull out, and people within the company began to doubt the future of the business. And Ingrid, with all the information and evidence she had gathered, seemed ready for the next turning point. She didn't need to take revenge by bringing anyone down. Ingrid knew that as long as she did what needed to be done, the betrayers would eventually be swept up in the storm they had created. Ingrid sat before the wooden table, the documents and reports on the state of her old company neatly arranged. She wasn't in a rush, but with every passing minute, it felt like everything was building towards a crucial moment. A significant change was on the horizon. Ingrid was no longer the woman who would quietly brood over her failures. She had moved past the time of falling apart, the time of sitting alone in a dark room, wondering if she could ever stand up again. Ingrid now had enough strength and perseverance to move forward, to do bigger things. The information she had gathered about her old company gradually began to form a clearer picture, and she felt ready to take action. Over the past few days, Ingrid had been making more detailed plans for her next steps. Things were starting to take shape, no longer vague as they once were. She no longer felt afraid or uncertain about the decisions she was about to make. Every piece of information she gathered, every move she made, was leading to an undeniable outcome. Her old company was slowly crumbling from within, and she was the one who would expose the truth. A part of her felt like she was standing before a door, just one push away from seeing everything change. But Ingrid didn't want everything to unfold too quickly. She knew that time and careful preparation would give her the upper hand. One day, Ingrid received an unexpected call from a former industry friend. She didn't think this call would be as important as it turned out to be. This friend had once been a key player in the marketing campaigns of her old company, and now he wanted to meet Ingrid to discuss a new opportunity. For the first time in a long while, Ingrid felt a glimmer of hope. This meeting would be part of her larger plan. The small but crucial details Ingrid had gathered about her old company would now provide her with an opportunity to reclaim what she had lost. While no one had ever acknowledged Ingrid's contributions in the past, she was now determined to prove her worth through her actions. Ingrid and her old friend met at a cafe. The meeting wasn't just a casual conversation. It was the first step for Ingrid to access potential opportunities. Although this friend had left the old company a long time ago, he still had strong connections within the industry. He shared with Ingrid the big problems her old company was facing, including the growing exposure of the company's financial misconduct. Ingrid couldn't hide her excitement when she heard this. What she had gathered wasn't just her personal issue, it was a matter affecting the entire company. This was the opportunity Ingrid needed to prove she wasn't a failure, but someone who could change the game. Throughout the conversation, Ingrid didn't rush to make decisions, but she felt that she was close to a major turning point. She needed to use everything she knew, not just to deal with those who had betrayed her, but also to build a stronger future. She couldn't let those who had exploited her get away easily. This meeting was just the first step, but it made Ingrid realize that she could take control of the situation. She knew that. To do this, she needed to prepare even more thoroughly. When the meeting ended, Ingrid stood up, clutching her purse tightly. She knew that from now on, she wouldn't just face those who had betrayed her, but she would face even bigger challenges. But Ingrid was no longer the weak girl they had once looked down upon. She had changed, becoming stronger and more determined than ever before. Before her lay a long road, but Ingrid knew that as long as she kept moving forward, nothing could stop her. In the following days, Ingrid began her work anew, but this time with a clear goal. She continued to research, gather information, and prepare a concrete plan. She started establishing relationships with influential people in the industry, reconnecting with old friends, and participating in valuable discussions. Ingrid wasn't in a hurry, but she knew that every step she took would be a part of her grand plan. No challenge, no matter how big, could make Ingrid hesitate. She didn't need to engage in a direct confrontation. She just needed effective strategies to prove that she could still win. With each step forward, Ingrid felt a shift within herself. She was no longer the person in the background, always overlooked. Ingrid had risen, and she had found her worth again. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone but herself, and all she needed to do now was rebuild her career, rebuild her future. Those who had betrayed her would no longer have the chance to continue down the path they had chosen. She wouldn't let them have the upper hand, and she wouldn't allow them to move ahead while pushing Ingrid back to the bottom. By the end of the week, Ingrid was ready to take the next step. She had prepared everything, ready to face the biggest challenges yet. Everything she had built, all the people she had reconnected with, helped her create a solid foundation to reclaim what she had lost. Ingrid didn't need to act in haste, but she was ready for whatever came next. And she knew that this time, she wouldn't just return, she would return stronger, more powerful, and nothing could stop her anymore. Ingrid stood before the large glass door of her new office, gazing out at the bustling city street, the streetlights shimmering brightly in the dark night. She was no longer the weak woman sitting in the shadows, drowning in failure. Ingrid had risen, not to blame those who had betrayed her, but to take steady steps on her own path. She didn't need to face them anymore, because the success she would achieve would be the strongest response. Ingrid knew that not everyone recognizes the strength of a woman who has fallen, but she now had the patience to prove herself. In the past few months, Ingrid had rebuilt her career from the broken pieces of her past. She was not in a hurry, nor was she making a scene. Ingrid's steps were built on meticulousness and persistence. She began with small projects, from which she could build her reputation and network. Those who had once stood on the sidelines, ignoring her, were now starting to see her in a new light. Ingrid understood that to regain what she had lost, she couldn't simply prove she was right. She needed to create lasting value, true success, and from there, she would stand firm in the industry she had once given everything to. One morning, as Ingrid was finalizing a new marketing strategy for a major client, she received an unexpected call from someone at her old company. The voice on the other end was no longer cold, but filled with concern. "Ingrid, we're in big trouble. The company is facing a financial crisis, and important partners are starting to pull out. Ingrid wasn't surprised to hear this. She had seen it coming for a long time, but what comforted Ingrid was her own current stability. She was no longer the weak person who was ready to listen to lies. Ingrid had found her own path, and now she felt she could stand strong even as those who had betrayed her were falling apart. Her old company, after making mistakes and poor decisions, began to face collapse. Partners who had once been crucial began to withdraw, and important business negotiations no longer succeeded as they once had. Ingrid didn't need to be part of that game anymore. She had once been an indispensable part of the company's success, but now her old company was witnessing its own decline. Their mistakes couldn't stay hidden forever, and the dark sides of their past were slowly being exposed. Meanwhile, Ingrid continued working diligently, but this time she wasn't working to prove anything to anyone. She was working to affirm her true value. One of the clients Ingrid had worked with over the past few months, a tech startup, began to see the success of the marketing strategies she had developed. The projects Ingrid had taken on started to yield significant results, not just for the clients, but for Ingrid herself. She didn't need to talk much about her successes because the results spoke for themselves. Those around her gradually realized that Ingrid not only had talent, but also the resilience to overcome any obstacle and rebuild her career. Then, a major turning point came. One afternoon, Ingrid received an invitation to speak at a large industry seminar where top marketing experts would present and share their strategies. This was a big opportunity for her to demonstrate that she had not stopped moving forward. Ingrid didn't need to worry about acceptance or criticism from the old colleagues. She just needed to do her job well, and the results would speak for themselves. As she stood before the crowd, the lights shining brightly, Ingrid's calm face stood out. She began presenting a marketing strategy she had developed, detailed analyses of market trends, and how to apply new technologies to enhance campaign effectiveness. She didn't need to mention her old company or those who had betrayed her. Everyone listened, and Ingrid's professionalism won them over. That was when Ingrid truly shone. After her presentation, Ingrid received applause from the attendees, many of whom she never expected would take notice of her. Compliments came not only from clients and partners, but also from industry experts. Ingrid knew that she hadn't just returned, she had returned stronger than ever. She didn't need to rush, nor did she need to win in any battle. She simply needed to keep moving forward, and everything would fall into place. As Ingrid walked out of the seminar hall, the daylight had softened, and she felt a sense of peace in her heart. She no longer cared about those who had betrayed her, no longer concerned with where they were or what they were doing. Ingrid understood that those people couldn't go far because they had been wrong from the start. Betrayal, failure, none of that could define Ingrid's future. It was she, with all her persistence and determination, who would shape her own future. She smiled gently, not with bitterness, but with calm understanding. She knew that life didn't require vengeance, only proof through real results, and Ingrid had done just that. When she got home, Ingrid looked at herself in the mirror. For the first time in a long time, she felt proud of herself, the struggles she had been through, the challenges she had overcome, and now she stood firm on her path. She no longer needed to wait for recognition from anyone. The greatest recognition came from the peace within, knowing that she had done right and was on the right path. Ingrid's story was not about seeking revenge. It was the story of a woman who had lost everything, but ultimately stood up to prove that only persistence and determination could create significant change. Ingrid's story is a message about true value, self-confidence, and faith in oneself. And the most important thing was that, no matter what, Ingrid always maintained a calm heart, free from bitterness, free from anger, only understanding that everything happens for a reason, and one day the truth will always prevail,